So then, Vitor Pereira is set to be named as the new Wolverhampton Wanderers head coach over the next couple of days, replacing Gary O'Neill, who was sacked on Sunday morning following 4 straight defeats and a defeat at home to Ipswich Town on Saturday. But I haven't really spoken much about it. I know it's been in the news for the last couple of days or so. We spoke a little bit about it on our podcast this week, if you want to go and check that one out. But in today's video, we're going to be looking at Vitor's career, what he could bring to Wolves, and my thoughts on it as well. And it's always great to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below, so be sure to do that and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel as we're approaching 18,000 subscribers. So what we know so far about Vitor Pereira's move to Wolverhampton Wanderers. Well, the Portuguese head coach, currently 56 years of age, is currently managing in Saudi Arabia for Al Shabab, a team that probably some of us aren't too familiar with, but they do currently have Daniel Pedence on their books. He was sold from Wolves to Al Shabab in the summer, and they're currently sat in 6th place in the Saudi Pro League. But he's got a £1 million or €1 million release clause. His contract is actually up at the end of the season, but it sounds like the manager is desperate to come to the Premier League. He's a head coach that has full belief in his own ability. Sometimes that could be a good thing, sometimes a not so good thing, but he's desperate to manage in the Premier League, and it sounds like it should be a pretty straightforward move for Wolves to complete. It hasn't really accelerated a huge amount over the last 24 hours or so, but in the last few hours it has been said that Pereira could be travelling to England by sort of Tuesday afternoon or evening, and there is an expectation that he may well be back in training for Wolves by Wednesday morning, which I think is quite pivotal with Wolves, of course, playing Leicester City away on Sunday. It'd be great to see Pereira in the dugout for that one. It's an interesting one because Wolves have sort of tried to steer away a little bit over the last sort of 12 to 18 months, away from the Portuguese connections, away from the Jorge Mendes links, but it looks like they're having to lean back on that now with the failure really of Gary O'Neill. And the move for Lopetegui didn't quite go to plan either. So they're leaning massively on Jorge Mendes, going into a time of trouble, really, Wolves. They're one from bottom, sat in 19th in the league, 4 points adrift as we speak in the Premier League as well. And they're having to lean on Uncle George to try and get us out of this mess once again. But Vitor Pereira is a really intriguing choice. When Gary O'Neill was sacked, of course, there were many names that were amongst the lips of Wolves fans. We would have said the Graham Potters, the David Moyes, the Conceiçãos of the world. But we already know over the last few weeks, during the last international break, they already said no to the Wolves move. So Wolves really had to sort of go down a level in regards to looking at championship managers or managers that had to sort of prove a point or think outside the box a little bit. And Vitor Pereira is maybe a little bit of both. He's a manager that's desperate to prove himself, and I'll explain why in a second as well. But probably not really a manager that was on the bookies' favourites at all, really. Wealth of experience, and again, you could take this in one way or another. If I flag his history up now on the screen, he's been managing since the early 2000s, really. And look at that list of teams that he's managed, but really started to make a name for himself at Porto, where initially he was the assistant for Andre Villas-Boas before he moved to Chelsea. And then during his time at Porto, he actually won 2 league titles. Now, the Porto fans never really took to Vitor Pereira for one reason or another. Maybe because his football wasn't the most attractive at the time, but had a squad of brilliant players. James Rodriguez, who was really starting to find his feet over in Portugal. João Moutinho, who Wolves fans are so familiar with as well, with Jackson Martinez up front as well. But Benfica were the firm favourites to win the league titles in those seasons with the money that they'd spent. But Vitor Pereira had got the best out of that Porto squad, had them as a solid unit, and ended up winning league titles. The rest of his career up until now, as you can see, he had a Saudi move in 2013-14 to Al Ahly, moved over to Greece to Olympiacos, Fenerbahce between 15 and 16. 1860 Munich in the Schweiz Bundesliga was an intriguing move, which I'll touch on in a second. Really sort of went to China at the right sort of time when all the money was there, and moved to Shanghai and won a couple of league titles over there. Fenerbahce in 21, Corinthians and Flamengo between 22 and 23, where he's now currently at Al Shabab back in the Saudi Pro League. Now, very quickly, I'll mention the 1860 Munich move, a move really which went completely against how his career had been going so far, and I don't know if you looked up the term journeyman, it would probably have Vitor Pereira's name next to it in the dictionary. It was a move that sort of went completely against how he'd been progressing. He'd been at Porto, Olympiacos, Fenerbahce, all top clubs in their nations. And then to move to 1860 Munich, who was struggling in the second division of Germany, was so strange. And he never managed to keep them up in the end. And really, that's where his career sort of stalled slightly. He's had some big moves since, went back to Fenerbahce, had, success over in Brazil as well, although fans in Brazil haven't taken to him quite kindly. So definitely a manager with pedigree, but a lot of that success and silverware came in the early stages of career, and that really hasn't really managed to repeat that. If you look into him, though, he's a manager who he's intriguing. You can see some of his old press conferences, some of his old team talks, or quotes about him, and he seems like a fiery character, but someone who is in love with football and devotes his life to football. And that's, I think, is what Wolves need right now. He can set his teams up very solid defensively. His points per game record is solid, and I think if he can continue with that record in regards to his points per game throughout his career, Wolves will probably have a fighting chance of staying in the Premier League. However, a lot of those points, if you look at his average, would probably come in his early days at the likes of Porto and Olympiacos, where he would be expecting to win a lot of football matches. One of the more intriguing things, which is I'm trying to dig into a little bit more over the next couple of days, and maybe I'll do some videos on it. He had a really strange saga with Everton Football Club, and this is probably the closest that Vitor Pereira has come to moving to the Premier League. Apparently on 3 separate occasions he'd been close to moving to Everton, and the most recent one was a few years ago when Frank Lampard ended up getting the job. And for whatever reason, Everton fans just really didn't take to the thought of having Vitor Pereira at the club. And even you will see pictures, I might display it on the screen now, graffiti saying Pereira out, Lampard in. And Everton fans were adamant they wanted Frank Lampard in. Obviously, it didn't quite go the way that the Toffees wanted, but Vitor Pereira has full faith in his ability, so much so that he rang up Sky Sports News to big up his CV and big up his capabilities as a head coach. Really, really strange move. If you want to watch that interview, you can do. And that, maybe I've got a little bit of reservations about that. And look, I don't think Wolves at the moment can get much lower and much worse than what they are in terms of league position, quality of football. Defensively, they've been awful. And although, like I said, I know Wolves are leaning back again towards Jorge Mendes, I think there's still some idea and thought in this. Like I said, Pereira defensively can set up teams very strongly. Historically, he was playing with a 4-3-3 at Porto. More recently, he switched to a 3-4-3 at some of his sides, and I think that will suit Wolves. No doubt Wolves will have to have a defender lined up very, very early in January. Again, no real names on who Wolves have been linked with as of right now, but you would expect in the early days of January they'll have a defender lined up, ready to go and ready to slot straight into Vitor's system. As we know right now, like I've already mentioned, a €1 million release clause, and it's set that his contract is going to be until June of 2026. So a season and a half, which I think is probably good for both parties. Gives Vitor a little bit of stability in his contract rather than just a 6-month deal, but gives Wolves that flexibility, and I'm sure there'll be some sort of exit clause at the end of the season if for whatever reason it's not a successful time for Vitor Pereira and Wolves do get relegated. But certainly an intriguing one. Wolves were linked with the likes of Carlos Corberán, John Eustace, both championship managers, both capable managers, don't get me wrong, but probably not the head coaches that Wolves would be aiming for in a time of trouble. This one with Vitor Pereira is a man with experience. Probably for some people does scream a little bit of Walter Zenga mixed with Bruno Lage. A real gamble for Wolves, but personally one that could pay off. And I'm really intrigued. I'm actually quite excited to go to Leicester on Sunday to see what Wolves come up with. And hopefully Vitor Pereira, with his fiery character, he could put a lid on the attitude and what's been going on with some of these players over the last couple of weeks, because their sort of emotion has been spilling out a little bit too much. If Vitor could get a lid on that, control them, get them playing solid football and getting some points on the board, a win on Sunday would be a really kickstart, hopefully a positive period once again for Wolverhampton Wanderers. In terms of staff, he's got an assistant manager that has followed him over the last few clubs, which I would fully expect him to rejoin with Vitor at Wolves as well, along with some of the other members of staff he's currently got at Al Shabab. The only member of staff remaining really of note at Wolves as of right now is Neil Cutler. Sort of saw the similar sort of thing when Tony Roberts stuck around as well after Bruno Lage had gone. Will we see the same with Neil Cutler? Maybe. But you would expect that Vitor Pereira will want to bring his own staff across to England. A lot of them obviously Portuguese as well. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, guys. As and when we get more information on this, I'll be sure to keep you updated. I'm sure in the next 24 hours or so we'll have plenty of news. But Vitor Pereira set to be named as the new head coach of Wolverhampton Wanderers. Until the next one, guys, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you do, and fingers crossed it's 3 points to kick off Pereira's reign as Wolverhampton Wanderers head coach.